John Heyman over the weekend tweeted that the Nats have some interest in JT Realmuto, but ownership would have to approve it because it would be a large expenditure. This is interesting. Do you see a fit between the Nationals and JT?
I don't. And the main reason is the cost. Of course, John, in a very general sense, is correct that yes, the Nationals will be interested in JT Realmuto, right? Like they have a lot of needs. He's the best, clearly the best catcher on the market, arguably the best player in free agency when it comes to overall value, considering his position, his defensive abilities. I just think he's going to be too expensive for them at this point, and they don't want to make. If they're going to make a big investment, I don't think they want to make it at catcher. And so, I wonder if this is finally going to be the offseason to end the Nationals and JT Realmuto. What if? Right? Like we feel like we do this every year. When he was on the Marlins wanted Victor Robles and Juan Soto at one point in a trade for him. And of course, Mike Rizzo was like, well, no. So, their association has been longstanding, and I would be very surprised with the ongoings here. I'd be very surprised if they do a high-end thing for a catcher. I think they're much more likely. You may see a name back there. I don't think Yadier Molina is like an outrageous idea because the contract would be short and much more reasonable. And you would be able to pair him with Jan, just like the Kurt Suzuki situation. I think that's more likely what would happen there.
That makes a lot of sense because the Nationals have a need for middle of the order bat, and when I think of middle of the order bat, I don't necessarily think of JT because sure. Realmuto is like 20-ish homers a year. But if they were to sign him, would that kind of have to be the middle of the order bat move that they would, because they couldn't get anybody else big if they signed him, right?
It would seem, right? And especially with their needs. It's a super curious offseason because they have multiple needs. They have a significant amount of money under the cap. We'll never know, the CBT. So we'll never know precisely on the outside how much money they have, but clearly they have a good amount of money. They probably have a good idea of what they're going to have to pay Juan Soto because he became arbitration eligible, which they anticipated. Trey Turner is going to get a raise in arbitration, right? So you need to take those two things off your top line, and your chunk of cash is going to shrink a bit. And then you look at how many things they need to do. That they're going to need every penny that they have under the CBT if they don't want to go over. And so, it's almost like this offseason, money is cheap. Some of the deals that we've seen and some of the non-deals that we've seen indicate to me that people aren't going to be very expensive relative to other years. So do you want to spend this offseason? You've heard me talk about this on the podcast probably. Do you want to spend this offseason because in 3 years, the cost of that guy would be so much higher and you could have done it now when the market was suppressed? So to me, that's what they need to do more. And if they had Realmuto, they would probably hit him higher in the lineup. And I think they would end up making an argument that, we got a middle of the order bat because we bumped everybody down. And we may end up seeing that argument anyway if they sign someone else who they need to put at the top of the order.
What kind of contract is roughly JT Realmuto looking at getting this offseason? He's going to be 30 in March. Right. He's obviously going to want a long-term deal, but do you have a sense for the dollar amount that would be attached for him?
I mean, again, it's tricky because of what we've seen so far, right? So this is the Brad Hand phenomenon. I keep coming back to this. Yeah. All 29 teams passed on him for $10 million in 1 year. And I was like, holy cow. I mean, he's a very good left-handed reliever who had some regression last year, but wow. Like that seemed a reasonable risk for a year to pay Brad Hand $10 million. So when it comes to hitters, you think in his case, he's going to want at least 5 years.
Yep.
And move into his mid-30s. That's not as off-putting as it may have been in the past because it would be essentially a Buster Posey situation, but you would have the DH at your disposal eventually, probably in the National League, well before that contract is up, so you can move him around if necessary, if you need to bring him out from behind the plate. And I can't imagine he wants less than $20 million annually.
Yeah.
So, that's a pretty big, I mean, you're quickly heading toward what Patrick Corbin cost, I would say.